We are rolling.
Well, first of all, let me welcome all of you here today. I'm joined by Jeffrey Medland, who's with the National Weather Service. I guess that's right?
Yes, sir.
And you're a meteorologist.
Yes.
As you all know, we're in the middle and just about coming up on the peak day of hurricane season. We've had a very active season. And so what I'd like to do is have a conversation with Jeffrey today, talk a little bit about where his expertise can help us all understand things a little better. So thank you for doing this first and foremost. We appreciate you for being here, and we appreciate what you and your colleagues do every day. So we've already had a very active season. Knowing that, and here we are at the very beginning of September, what are the projections for the rest of the season?
Well, thank you for asking, and thank you for having us here today. We want the local community and region that we serve to know who we are and what we do. We are your local National Weather Service office in Mobile that serves 20 counties throughout Alabama, parts of Mississippi, and Northwest Florida. We are basically very focused on this particular season that's active. It's already set a record for the number of storms, already being on the O storm for August and September both, for a number of named storms so quickly. And the adjustment to the projections for the number of storms looking forward has been pretty much increased significantly to expect 17 to 25. So
we've already had 15.
We've already had 15 named, and the projections about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, were bumped up to 15 to 20. And the number of hurricanes, 7 to 11, and 3 to 6 for major hurricanes, and that is out of the Atlantic basin, the entire basin, but it only takes one.
Right, I heard somebody say one time, the definition of a bad hurricane season is when there's one hurricane but it hits you.
That is correct.
So God bless those poor people over in Louisiana. That was a heck of a storm with Laura. So we're in the middle of a really bad hurricane season, lots of hurricanes, in the middle of a pandemic. So tell me about the challenges that we're all facing as we get prepared for a potential storm in the middle of a pandemic.
I think as far as the agencies at the federal, state, and local levels that work together, surprisingly this year went off without a hitch. We're always prepared. We start, for example, our preparedness working with our partners as early as November prior to the next hurricane season. So we're ready to roll in June, testing our equipment, working with our local emergency management, working at the state level. We've been able to do tabletop exercises virtually, and we have those tools to do that. So I think that part's went off without a hitch. What people are most likely to experience is if they have to evacuate, they have to be prepared to expect that things may not be the way they were if they went to a shelter before. They will have to obviously follow guidelines for social distancing and whatever the CDC may impose, working with the interpretation of the local emergency manager.
Yeah, we've had some meetings earlier in the year, and what I understand they're doing here locally, if we have to have people evacuate, is that you will go to a central spot, but you may be sent to a hotel, and you'll be in a hotel room. But if we fill up the hotel rooms, we'll have to continue to use the big places, the high school gyms, etc. But they're going to be very different. You're not going to have cots set up that close to one another. People will be spread out. You'll be tested, at least tested for if you've got a fever or whatever. So we're all going to have to be a little more patient because it's going to take time to work all this out. But it does sound to me like we're prepared.
We are absolutely prepared and have already been tested. So things went off without a hitch communications-wise. Very, very pleased at the way that went off.
So here we are, almost at the peak of the hurricane season. Hopefully people have already done the preparations they should make sort of long term. But in case somebody hasn't, what should people do to prepare?
Well, I would suggest strongly that you have to have a plan prior to finding out a day or two before that something is going to happen and then scrambling around. And then not only must you have a plan, it must be written down, and you have to know how to execute that plan. And that involves a variety of preparedness from your family members, medication, making preparations for your home, your pets. You can't forget about the pets, because if you were to take pets to a shelter, that's a whole nother situation.
Not all shelters allow pets.
Yes, and one other thing, the way rapid intensification of storms have been going these days close to the coast, there may be little or no time to have days when you're watching something approach you. It may happen in a matter of hours. Looking back at Opal of 1995, that happened overnight very quickly. So you have to know your evacuation route. Know how to get out if you have to get out and you have to leave. And you have to also, very important, tropical cyclones carry a variety of hazards, as you know: tornadoes, surge, the wind, and the heavy rainfall. Surge is the #1 killer, but if you live up on a hill and far inland, you don't have to worry about surge. But if you do live in an area where surge is a problem, you need to know what your local impacts are going to be, and that helps you make your plan.
So let's suppose that I'm a person that lives in an area that might have a problem with water inundation. How would I know in advance of the storm what I should expect in terms of, I guess it's the number of feet above regular water level? How do you find that out?
Yes, sir. So what will happen is, once the storm gets within 72 hours or so, and then watches and warnings are being issued, we also have now, in addition to tropical cyclone watches and warnings like tropical storm and hurricane, we have storm surge watches and warnings. And those data are ran every 6 hours every time there's an advisory. And your local National Weather Service office takes those impacts from the model that it comes from, and we break it down for the local community.
Good.
And we break that down to what it means for each of the local communities, and that's readily available on weather.gov/MOB. And you can see that from our local office and how we work to break down the local impacts.
Let's say that again: weather.gov/MOB.
Yes, sir.
So everybody who lives anywhere near an underlying area, these storms get 72 hours out, start paying attention to that, because water is usually the killer, isn't it?
It is usually the killer, and a little over 50% from the surge if you look historically. But then when you add in freshwater flooding, you can approach 60-75% of the total deaths. And people are thinking wind. Now, wind can kill, but we usually tell people, run from the water and hide from the wind.
Right.
You can usually take shelter from the wind.
Now, we had some people that took shelter from the wind over in Laura, but trees fell into their house, and like half the deaths were that. As I recall, half the deaths were from people that had generators that they put inside their house, and they died of carbon monoxide poison. So people, if they have generators, keep their generators outside the house.
That's right, and that's harkens back to your question about the preseason preparedness. If you're going to be playing with a generator or using a generator, make sure you understand how to use it. You want to be in a well-ventilated area, and you certainly don't want to, run the electricity back the other way, resulting in even more problems, if you will. So,
right.
Yep.
So people should get to know their generators.
Yes, sir.
Make sure you know about ventilation, and don't make the mistake. Some people who unfortunately died from carbon monoxide poisoning over there in Louisiana. So another thing that I'm concerned about, there are a number of people who watch this who are elderly themselves, or maybe they're caring for an elderly person. Moving an elderly person around is difficult for a storm, is difficult under normal circumstances. And circumstances where we're trying to protect them from exposure to other people because of the disease, it seems to me that puts an even greater burden on us to make sure we think way in advance about, if we're elderly, moving ourselves, or if we're taking care of someone who's elderly, how we move them.
And I think you're absolutely right, particularly obviously in this COVID world that we're in at the moment. And that goes again right back to having a plan and not being last minute. You may not have a situation where you can eliminate 100% of the risk.
Right.
But what you can do is think through the problem, think through the situation logically, and try to mitigate the risk and make it as low as it can possibly be, following the guidelines that we're all given, and realizing you're going to have to exercise patience. But I'm glad you brought that up, because we're putting in our preseason preparedness, when people make a plan, we're explicitly asking to check on your neighbor, particularly those who are elderly or handicapped or may have an issue, looking out for one another. That's what we do as Americans best.
And around here we do it great.
We sure do.
I've seen, unfortunately, I've been through a lot of storms, but we do check on one another. But in this particular hurricane season, we just got to be thinking a lot further ahead, because it's not quite as easy to move people around, or if we're elderly ourselves, to move ourselves around in this environment. So I've often heard that the first casualty in a war is the truth. So sometimes during these storms, one of the first casualties is getting good, accurate information. And it's important to have good, accurate information. So what's the best place for people to go to get good, accurate information?
Well, we suggest, going, starting with your local National Weather Service. That's where the watches and the warnings come from that are official. Also, reliable local media sources. They are great partners. A lot of the times we're looking at the science of the situation, and they're helping us get the message out. The media are wonderful for helping us get getting the message out locally and regionally. But we do want to warn people that, especially in the days of social media, that there are some very unreliable sources that are out there, either pretending to be an official source and they're not. So please make sure before you take any action that you're getting that information from a reliable source.
Well, the National Weather Service is certainly the most reliable source, but you're right. We have some really great local weathermen and weatherwomen that are on our local television stations. They do a pretty good job of staying on top of it, but they're working with you when they do that.
They're great partners, and we've worked many decades. I've been here since 1994, and I've actually been through many tropical cyclones and many service assessments after the tropical cyclones. And one of the greatest things that was lauded about the National Weather Service and the local media is the great relationship that's always been there, because we work very hard to get the message out, and they help amplify our message.
That's great information, everybody. So thank you again for coming in and doing this. If you haven't already made your plans, please sit down today and think through what you need to do to take care of yourself and your family. If you have pets, your pets, how you can secure your house and the property around your house. And really good point. Let's look out for one another, because we all need to have to work together to protect one another. And as we said, we're good at doing that, but the more we think about that as we come through these storms, the better. Thank you again. Everybody stay safe, and let's pray we don't even have to think about this hurricane season.